Oh, you're the new clerk? Try not to break anything, sweetheart. This desk's seen real soldiers. It can probably survive you. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brennan said it loud enough for the whole orderly room to hear, because that was the point. He was leaning on the front counter with his sleeves rolled to regulation and his coffee going cold in his fist. And he had 2 junior soldiers behind him who would laugh at whatever he said. So he said it like a man playing to a crowd that was already his. The new woman had not even reached her desk yet. She had a paper cup in one hand and a thin folder under her arm, and she was wearing a plain red top and nothing that told anyone who she was. She did not rise to it. She did not even slow down. She set her coffee on the corner of the desk, squared the stapler to the edge with one finger, and looked at him the way the tide looks at a sandcastle, without heat, without hurry, without any apparent need to do anything about it, at all. Then she sat, and she went to work. The orderly room of the battalion headquarters was a low room of gray carpet and humming printers, 3 windows that looked out on a parking lot, and the permanent smell of coffee that had been on the burner too long. It was the rear of a unit whose best people were somewhere else. The ones left behind ran the paperwork, the in-processing, the personnel actions that kept the machine fed, and Brennan ran the front counter like it was his own small country. He had been a combat soldier once, and would tell you so within 10 minutes. Now he was on rear detachment with a chevron to polish and a slow morning to fill, and a new clerk was the most interesting thing that had happened all week. He watched her settle in and waited to be amused. That was the thing about Brennan, the thing the room had learned to live around the way you live around a draft from a bad window. He needed an audience the way other men needed air, and a new arrival was fresh ground. He had decided who she was in the first 3 seconds, the way small men decide everything, and nothing she did for the rest of the morning was going to be allowed to change it. She was the new clerk. She was beneath him. He had said so out loud, and saying it out loud had made it true in the only court that mattered to him, which was the court of 2 privates who were afraid of his rank. She took the room in one pass. Anyone watching closely, and almost no one was, would have seen her eyes move once across the whole space and stop nowhere. The 2 exits, the placards on the desks, the duty roster pinned to the cork board, the fire panel, the window, and what the window showed. It was the glance of someone counting a room out of habit, the way other people breathe. Then it was gone, and she was just a woman opening a personnel database and beginning to log actions faster and cleaner than the last 3 people who had sat in that chair. At the back of the office, Sergeant First Class Glenn Whitaker looked up from his screen. Whitaker was the senior administrator in the shop, 50-some years old, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had been downrange enough times to stop being impressed by loud men. He had been about to send an email. He did not send it. He watched the new clerk's hands instead, because a binder slid off the edge of the counter near her, and without looking, without turning her head from the screen, she caught it against her hip, set it flat, and kept typing. Now, where'd a clerk learn to do that? Whitaker said quietly to no one. Brennan, of course, learned nothing from any of it. He came off the counter and drifted to her desk, because the joke needed feeding. "Hey, take it easy on that keyboard killer," he said. "You got a flagged record over there. Bet you don't even know what a suspense date is. Want me to walk you through it real slow?" The woman did not look up. "The flag's a duplicate entry from a unit transfer," she said. "The suspense already cleared. Somebody just never closed the action." Her voice was even and low and entirely without drama, and it was correct, which was worse. She closed the action while he stood there. For a second, the room was very quiet. One of the junior soldiers behind the counter glanced at the other. Brennan recovered with a grin and a shrug, the way a man does when the laugh did not come where he wanted it. "Lucky guess," he said, and went back to his counter, certain he had won something. He could not have said what. At the back of the room, Glenn Whitaker closed his email without sending it and began, very deliberately, to watch the new clerk's hands. She worked through the morning like water, finding its level. The terminal at the corner desk had thrown an error for 2 days, and the whole shop had learned to route around it the way you step over a broken stair. The new clerk looked at it for the length of a held breath, typed 3 things, and the error was gone. The junior soldiers were openly impressed now. Brennan was openly annoyed, which in him amounted to the same thing. One of the privates, a kid named No One Would Remember by lunch, said it before he thought better of it. Sergeant Brennan couldn't fix that in 2 days, he said, half to himself, and then went red when he realized he'd said it where Brennan could hear. The new clerk did not look up and did not smile, but something at the corner of her mouth moved 1/4 of an inch and then was gone, and the private decided he liked her, and decided also never to say so where the staff sergeant could hear it. Whitaker decided to test her. He carried a stack of flagged files to her desk and set them down without explanation. The ugly ones, the records nobody wanted, the kind that take judgment and not just keystrokes. "When you get a minute," he said. She did not get to them in order. She fanned them once, and then she sorted them, not alphabetically, not by date, but by something else. The time-sensitive ones came to the top. The ones with a soldier's pay, or a soldier's family on the line came next. The ones that could wait went to the bottom. She built a priority stack out of a pile of paper in about 4 seconds, the way a person sorts a problem when lives have hung on the order of operations before, and then she started working it from the top. "You've done more than orderly room work," Whitaker said. "I've filled a lot of desks," she answered, and reached up to the top shelf for a binder. Her sleeve slid back as she reached, and for a moment the inside of her forearm showed. And on it, faded and old and small, a unit mark Whitaker had seen exactly twice in his life, both times on men who did not talk about where they had been. Then the cuff fell back over it, and she had the binder, and she was back at her desk, and the tattoo was gone, as if it had never been there. Whitaker stood holding nothing and went very still himself. He knew that mark. He knew what it cost to wear it. And he knew, with the slow, cold certainty of a man who has just seen something that does not fit, that the most dangerous person in the building was sitting at the worst desk in it, in a red shirt, closing other people's paperwork. He thought about a man he had served with, years ago, on a base in a country he was not supposed to name, who had worn a mark like that under his sleeve and never once spoken of it. That man had been the calmest human being Whitaker had ever stood next to. Calm the way the new clerk was calm. Calm in a way that had nothing to do with peace, and everything to do with having already seen the worst the world had to offer and decided to keep walking through it anyway. That man had caught things out of the air without looking, too. That man had read a room the way she had read this one, in a single glance that landed nowhere and missed nothing. Whitaker had not thought about him in a long time. He thought about him now, and his coffee went cold in his hand. He did not say anything. There was nothing yet to say. Brennan, who had seen none of it, decided the morning needed more of him. He came back to her desk with a procedure question designed to embarrass, an obscure one, a regulation most clerks would have to look up. He recited it wrong on purpose and waited for her to either parrot the mistake or fumble. She did neither. "That's the wrong paragraph," she said, and gave him the right one. Number, subsection, and the line that mattered. Without looking it up, the way you recite something you have lived inside. The room quieted again. It was a small thing. But it was the second time in one morning that the new clerk had been right, and the loud man had been wrong, and even people who were not paying attention had started, somewhere underneath, to pay attention. Brennan laughed it off, but he didn't come back to her desk for a while. By mid-morning, he had found a better weapon than questions, which was a crowd. Brennan was the kind of man who was only ever as brave as his audience, and the orderly room gave him one. He coined a nickname for her, something small and belittling, the kind of thing that is funny only because everyone is afraid not to laugh. And the junior soldiers laughed because he was a staff sergeant, and they were not. "Relax, fellas," he said, loud, when she did not react. "She files like a champ. Somebody's got to hold down the desk while the rest of us do the real job." She let it pass. She had let larger things than Kyle Brennan pass. She had let governments lie about where she had been. She had let a stone with a wrong date carved into it stand in a row of stones. A nickname from a staff sergeant on rear-detachment did not register on the scale she used to measure the weight of things, and so she did not react. And her not reacting was a language Brennan could not read and would not stop trying to translate. He grew bolder, the way a man does when nothing pushes back. Crossing behind her chair to the printer, he bumped it, hard with his hip, enough to slosh her coffee across the desk, and turned it into an accident with a wide, performing grin. "Whoa, my bad," he said to laughter. "Tight quarters." She righted the cup before it finished tipping. She moved the way deep water moves, slow, certain, and carrying more force than the surface ever showed. And she wiped the desk with a single paper towel and went back to the file in front of her without a word. The not reacting was starting to bother him more than any reaction could have. He could not make her flinch, and he did not understand why that frightened him a little. So he covered the fright with more noise. Whitaker had had enough of it. He crossed the room, took Brennan by the elbow, and walked him a few steps away from the counter, his voice low and flat. "Ease off," Whitaker said. "I mean it. Leave the clerk alone." Brennan grinned. "It's a clerk, Sergeant." "Lighten up." "Son," Whitaker said, "you want to be careful which still water you go kicking. Some of it's deeper than the bottom you're picturing." "You feeling okay, Sergeant Whitaker?" Brennan said, and laughed, and pulled his elbow free, and went back to his counter to be a king again. Whitaker watched him go and did not feel better. Across the room, alone for a moment, the new clerk had stopped working. There was a framed photograph on the neighboring desk, somebody's deployment picture, a row of soldiers squinting into hard sun in front of a wall of sandbags and a mountain line. Her eyes had caught on it and stayed. For one full second, her face did something it had not done all morning, a softening and a sharpening at once, the look of a person seeing not a photo, but a place she had been, a place that had taken something from her. Then she felt herself doing it, and the mask came back down like a curtain, and she was a clerk again, and she went back to her files. But for that 1 second, anyone watching would have known she did not belong at that desk. Almost no one was watching. If you have ever watched the loud ones forget who they were mocking, stay with this one, and subscribe to the Veteran Vault, because what happens in this hallway is the reason the channel exists. By noon, it had stopped being a joke, because Brennan had decided the new clerk did not belong in his orderly room at all. It started at the file cabinet along the back wall. She had gone to it for a record she needed to close an action, the way she had gone to it twice already that morning, but this time Brennan was watching for a way to win, and he found one. "Hey," he said, sharp, loud enough to turn heads. "Hey, who said you could be back there? That's restricted. Those are flagged files." "I'm closing a personnel action," she said. "The record's in this drawer." "Yeah? Who cleared you to be back here?" He came around the counter now, into the open, because there was a crowd, and the crowd was his. "You got paperwork for that access, or did you just wander in off the street and start opening drawers? Because I don't know you. Nobody knows you. You show up in a red shirt and start acting like you run my shop." She straightened. the file in her hand, and looked at him with no expression at all. "Your shop's in processing has a 14-day backlog," she said quietly. "I'm clearing it. The access came down with my assignment." "I didn't see any assignment," Brennan said. And that was the moment he chose to make it physical, because words were not getting him the win he wanted. He reached out and took her by the upper arm, not gently. A grip meant to steer and to shame, the grip of a man moving a thing out of his way in front of people. His hand closed on her arm. She let it. She had broken wrists that gripped harder than that, in places with no names, and she stood now as still as a loaded rifle on safe. The audience to this, the part of the room that could not look away, and the part that suddenly could not bear to, did not know what they were seeing. They saw a clerk being manhandled by a staff sergeant. They did not see what she saw, which was exactly how he was standing, where his weight sat, how many ways and how quickly this could end if she decided it should. She read it the way she read everything, in a glance, and then she did the hardest thing in her training, which was nothing. The junior soldiers went quiet and found other places to look. The room's easy cruelty curdled into something more uncomfortable. A few people drifted toward their desks. Cruelty is fun in a crowd until the moment it stops being a joke, and the moment had come, and they could feel it even if they could not name it. What none of them could have explained was why the air in the room had changed. Brennan had her by the arm. By every visible measure he was in control, the bigger person, the one with the rank and the grip. And yet some animal part of every person in that office had begun to understand that the controlled thing in the room was not Brennan. It was the woman standing perfectly still inside his grip, the one who had not tensed and had not pulled away, and had not done a single one of the things a cornered person does. She stood inside his hand, the way a held grenade sits in a fist, not struggling, because struggling was beside the point, and the part of the room that could feel it wanted very badly to be somewhere else. Whitaker was half out of his chair, but a phone rang on the company line, and Brennan, sensing the room turning, needing a way to make his win look official, answered the turning with authority instead of apology. "You know what? I'm not dealing with this," he announced, loud, releasing her arm with a little shove of dismissal. "Until somebody who outranks me sorts out who you actually are, you can wait outside. Go sit in the hall. This is a headquarters, not a bus stop." It was a petty thing, and an ugly one, and it was dressed up as a rule, which is how the worst small things usually come. She did not argue. She set the file down on the cabinet, squared it to the edge out of habit, and walked out to the hallway bench without a word, with the unhurried dignity of someone who had waited in far worse places than a carpeted corridor. The doors swung shut behind her. The office let out a breath it had not known it was holding. Whitaker did not. He sat back down slowly, watched the doors she had gone through, and then he picked up his phone and started, very quietly, making calls about who the new clerk actually was. The first call he made was to an old friend, a retired sergeant major he had served 2 tours with, the kind of man who had spent a career around units that did not have names you could say in a hallway. Whitaker kept his voice low and his back to the room. "I need you to tell me something, and not ask me why I want to know," Whitaker said. "There's a mark, inside the right forearm, small, faded, old." He described it, the shape of it, the device, the way it was worn where a uniform sleeve would always cover it. The line went quiet. Then it went cold. "Where did you see that?" the old sergeant major said. It was not a question so much as a warning. "Glenn, listen to me. You did not see that. Whoever's wearing that, you leave it alone. You do not ask. You do not write it down. You do not say the word that goes with it out loud in a building full of people. Are you hearing me?" "I'm hearing you," Whitaker said. "I mean it. The people who wear that are either dead, or they're the reason somebody else isn't. Either way, it's not yours to go digging in." Whitaker hung up and sat with it. Then he did the thing he was good at, which was paperwork, and he pulled what little there was on the new clerk's personnel file. It did not take long, because there was almost nothing there. The record was sealed in places it should not have been sealed. It was redacted where a clerk's file has no reason to be redacted. The dates did not line up. There was a line in it, buried in the administrative language, that should not have been in the file of a living person at all. A notation, a status, a closing of an account. Every clerk leaves a paper trail. This one left a grave. He read it twice to be sure he had read it right. He pulled at the corners of it the way a man worries a loose tooth. Looked at the dates, looked at the gaps, looked at the places where a normal file has a name and a unit and a chain of assignments, and this one had only blank space and a seal. A clerk's record is a boring thing, a long flat list of postings and schools and pay actions. This was not boring. This was a record that someone had built specifically so that anyone who pulled it would learn nothing and stop asking. The only way to build a file like that was to have access. Most people in this building did not know existed, and the only reason to build one was to hide a person who could not be allowed to be found by the ordinary world. Then he closed the file and looked at the doors to the hallway, and the unease in his gut became a cold and complete certainty. Whoever was sitting on that bench had been, on paper, buried. And somebody had stood her back up and parked her at the worst desk in his battalion, in a red shirt, and his staff sergeant had spent the morning shoving her around for sport. He got up and went to find Brennan. He found him at the counter, holding court again, the morning's discomfort already metabolized into a story where Brennan was the hero who kept order. Whitaker got close and got quiet and got serious in a way that finally made the younger man blink. "Whatever you think she is," Whitaker said, "you're wrong, and you do not have the rank to be this wrong. I'm telling you as a favor you don't deserve. Go out to that hallway, apologize to that woman, and walk away. Do it now, before this gets out of your hands." Brennan searched his face for the joke and did not find one, and that scared him for exactly 1 second before his pride papered over it. "You're losing it, Sergeant," he said. "She's a clerk. I'll bring her back in when I feel like it." And he turned back to his counter, because a man like that always turns back to his counter. Out in the hallway, the woman in the red shirt sat on the bench, with her hands folded in her lap, calm, patient, breathing slow. Through the window behind her, out in the parking lot, a black sedan pulled in and stopped, and sat there with its engine ticking, and did not leave. Whitaker watched Brennan walk back to finish what he had started, and felt the floor of the morning drop away beneath them all. What the boy in the pressed uniform did not know was what the next 10 minutes were about to teach him. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault so you don't miss it, because it is coming. To understand why a black sedan would cross 3 states to find a clerk on a bench, you have to go back 8 years to a rooftop on the far side of the world on a night that was supposed to end with 11 funerals and ended, instead, with 1. In the spring of 2018, Master Sergeant Dana Holloway was 31 years old and went by a name the Army did not print. 5 years before, she had been selected to a Joint Special Operations Task Force, one of the small, dark units that work in the places between the lines on a map. And somewhere in those 5 years, the men around her had stopped using her name and started using the other one. They called her Ghost. She had earned it the way those names are earned, by being where the enemy swore no one could be, and by being gone again before they could prove she had ever been there at all. That night, the objective went wrong from the first minute. The assault force put down on the roof, and the intelligence was bad, and the enemy was waiting. And within 90 seconds, the team was pinned in a stairwell, with the comms cut, and the exfiltration corridor compromised, and the night filling up with muzzle flashes from 3 sides. There were 11 men on that rooftop who were supposed to die that night. She decided otherwise, and she decided it alone. The math was simple and terrible, and she did it in about 4 seconds the way she sorted everything. Somebody had to hold the breach so the others could move. Somebody had to draw the fire onto themselves and open a corridor and keep it open long enough for 11 men to get off that roof and down to the alley where the corridor could become an extraction. The person who did that was, by the arithmetic of that night, not coming back. She did not put it to a vote. She put her shoulder to the door, told her team the route, and went the other way alone into the dark. What she did over the next 11 minutes does not have a clean word. She moved through the building, drawing everything onto herself. Loud, where she needed to be loud, and silent, where silence killed. Turning herself into the most interesting target on the objective, so that the rest of them could be the least. She opened the corridor. She held it. And when one of her men went down in the open and could not move, she went back into the worst of it, and got him, and carried him as far as a human being can carry another human being under fire, until she could hand him to the others, and turn around, and go back to holding the door. There is no clean way to carry a wounded man through a kill zone, and she did not do it cleanly. She did it the only way it can be done, which is by deciding that the weight on her shoulder was going to live whatever it cost the body underneath it, and then refusing every signal her own body sent that the cost was too high. She made the alley. She handed him down to the others, into hands that reached up out of the dark for him, and she did not climb down after him. There was still a door to hold. There were still rounds coming from the high windows. There were still men in that alley who were not yet on the aircraft, and so she turned around and went back up into the worst of it, alone, one more time, because that was the arithmetic, and the arithmetic did not care how tired she was. They tallied the living on the bird and came up 1 short. The 1 short was the reason the rest were breathing. She was hit at the wall, more than once badly, as the last of the team cleared the alley. She went down with her hand pressed flat against cold concrete, and the helicopters already lifting away into the dark with her people aboard. And in the chaos and the dust and the bad comms, the report that went up the chain was the only one the situation could produce. She was gone. They had not seen her stand. No one could reach her. The bird was full, and the window was closing, and the men she had saved were screaming her name into a radio that answered with nothing. She did not die. That is the part the record never managed to say. She was recovered later, in a way that does not get told, and she was kept alive in rooms without names. And the mission that should never have happened was classified into a darkness so complete that the simplest way to close the books on it was to leave them closed. A soldier the system needed to be dead became dead on paper, because a living legend of a buried mission is an inconvenient thing, and a headstone is so much tidier than a question. She healed in silence over months that became years, and when she was well enough to ask what came next, the answer she was handed was a kind of nothing, a status unresolved, a name the system did not want to reactivate, a series of quiet administrative postings where a person could be useful and invisible at the same time. She did not haunt the world by accident. They named her Ghost, and then they made her one. She let it stand. That was the part her team could never forgive and never stop trying to undo. She let the stone stand because she was tired, and because the men were home, and because a person who has given that much sometimes has nothing left over for the fight to be counted. She filled desks. She closed other people's actions. She wore plain clothes because she had no rank the system would let her put back on, and she sat in the back of rooms and counted the exits out of habit, and she waited for nothing in particular. And 8 years and an ocean away, her hand pressed flat to a cold wall in the dark became a hand folded quietly on a hallway bench as boots came up the corridor toward her, and a black sedan ticked in a parking lot, and a staff sergeant, who had never heard the word ghost, walked out through a set of double doors to throw a legend into the street. Brennan came through the doors with his audience trailing behind him because he could not do anything anymore without one. The discomfort in the office had not gone away while she sat outside. It had concentrated, and now half the orderly room had drifted to the hallway to see how it ended, and that crowd was the worst possible thing to put in front of Kyle Brennan. He needed to win in front of it. He had decided that winning meant the new clerk gone for good. "On your feet," he said, standing over the bench. "You're done loitering in my building. I gave you a chance to sit quiet. Now you're leaving. Out." She looked up at him, calm, and did not move, and that was unbearable to him. So he reached down and took her by the arm again, harder this time, and hauled her up off the bench. She came up, and then he shoved her, both hands, toward the doors at the end of the corridor. A real shove, the kind meant to put a person on the ground in front of people so they learn their place. She did not go to the ground. She gave with the push like a door on a good hinge, rolling the force away through her feet and her hips, and came to rest 3 steps back facing him. Weight even, hands open and loose at her sides, perfectly balanced, perfectly still. The way no clerk has ever in the history of clerks come to rest. It was nothing. It was the smallest thing. But somewhere in the back of the crowd, a sergeant who had been to war felt the hair on his arm stand up, because he had seen men move like that, and they had not been men you shoved. The crowd saw it too, the ones who were paying attention, and a strange thing began to move through the hallway. A dawning, a turning, the slow reversal that happens when a watching crowd realizes it has been laughing at the wrong person. The sergeant whose arms had gone to gooseflesh took a half step back without deciding to. A specialist near the wall stopped recording on her phone and lowered it, because some instinct told her this was not a thing she wanted to be holding up a camera to. The shove had been supposed to end it, to put the clerk on the floor and the matter to rest. And instead, it had shown the whole corridor something none of them had words for, and the silence that followed was not the silence of a crowd enjoying a humiliation. It was the silence of a crowd that has just understood it is in the presence of something it does not understand. For 1 second, she looked at Kyle Brennan the way she had once looked at a breach she was about to go through. There was nothing dramatic in it. There was no anger. There was just a flat, total weather system attention, the look of someone deciding how much of herself the situation required, and he felt it land in his stomach like cold water, a drop of pure animal fear with no idea what had caused it. Then she folded it away, put it back in the place she kept it, and was a still woman in a red shirt again. "You should stop now," she said, quietly, almost kindly. Brennan, of course, could not stop, because the crowd had seen him shove her, and he could not be the man who blinked. He drew a breath to give the order that would make it final, to call someone to remove her, to win. At the edge of the crowd, Glenn Whitaker wasn't looking at Brennan. He was looking through the glass doors at the far end of the corridor, out at the parking lot, where the black sedan's doors were open now, and men were crossing the asphalt toward the entrance. 4 of them in plain clothes, unhurried, moving with an economy and a sameness that made them look less like visitors and more like something the weather had sent. And the double doors at the end of the hallway opened. They came in like weather. 4 men in plain clothes, civilian jackets, nothing that named them, nothing that ranked them, and yet every soldier in that corridor felt the temperature change. The room did not know to be afraid yet, but it stopped talking. There is a way that certain men occupy a doorway, a quality of stillness and readiness that the body recognizes before the mind does, and the orderly room recognized it now, all at once, the way a herd lifts its head before it knows why. They scanned the corridor once, a single sweep, fast and total, and then all four of them locked onto the woman standing in the middle of it in a red shirt, and they stopped. The man in front was tall and weathered and somewhere in his 40s, and he went absolutely still when he saw her. The man beside him, broad, hard-faced, late 30s, with the kind of eyes that had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago, took 2 steps forward, and then a third, and stopped 3 feet from her, and the word came out of him like a breath he had been holding for 8 years. Ghost. He came to attention as he said it. In the middle of an army hallway, in civilian clothes, Master Sergeant Reuben Tice came to attention in front of a clerk, and his voice cracked on the single syllable. "Reuben," the woman said. Quietly. And something in her face that had been closed since the spring of 2018 opened a fraction of an inch. Brennan did not understand. He could not understand. He had no frame for it. He saw 4 men in plain clothes walk into a restricted building and brace up to a woman he had spent the morning calling a clerk, and the only tool he had was the one he always reached for. "Hey," he said, and his voice came out higher than he wanted. "Hey, this is a restricted headquarters. Who are you people? You can't just walk in here. I need to see identification, all of you, right now." The tall man in front looked at Brennan for the first time, and it was not a hard look, which was somehow worse. It was the look you give a thing you have just noticed and already finished with. Major Dominic Castellano did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Staff Sergeant," Castellano said, "the woman you have been shoving around your hallway is Master Sergeant Dana Holloway. We buried her twice, and she keeps not staying buried. She held a breach alone in 2018 so that 11 men could go home. And I am 4 of those men's commander, and 2 of those men are standing in this hallway, and there are 9 more who have spent 8 years refusing to believe a piece of paper. Step back from her. Now." The hallway did not breathe. Brennan's face went through it in stages, the way these things go, the way everyone in that corridor would describe it later when they told the story, because they would all tell the story for the rest of their lives. First the confusion, the grin still half-formed, the certainty that this was a mistake, that any second now it would resolve into something he understood. Then the disbelief, as the words arranged themselves and refused to mean anything other than what they meant. Then the slow, sick recognition of a man who has just learned the exact dimensions of his mistake. And then the horror, plain and total, the color going out of his face from the top down as he understood that he had put his hands twice on a person whose name was spoken at attention by men like these. Confusion, then disbelief, then the slow, sick recognition. The corridor came to attention around him like a tide coming in, soldier after soldier straightening without an order, drawn upright by something older than rank, and it left Kyle Brennan standing alone in the middle of it, the only bent thing in a hallway gone straight. Glenn Whitaker let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since the first time her sleeve rode up. The 2 operators behind Castellano had not moved and had not stopped looking at her, and the looking was its own kind of salute, the way men look at someone they had decided to grieve and have just been given back. Tice was still at attention. He had not come off it. There were tears standing in his eyes, and he was not ashamed of them, and no one in that hallway would ever have dreamed of saying a word about it. He had been the man in the open in 2018. He had been the weight on her shoulder, The one she went back into the fire to carry. The one she handed down into reaching hands and then turned away from to hold a door alone. He had spent 8 years with the arithmetic of that night living in his chest like a second heartbeat. 11 men home, 1 not, and the 1 was the reason for the 11. And he had refused, every single day of those 8 years, to believe that the world had been allowed to keep the 1. And now she was standing 3 feet in front of him in a red shirt with a stapler squared on a desk behind her, and the arithmetic had finally, impossibly, come out even. "You went back," Tice said very quietly, not really to her, more to the 8 years. "We told them you went back for me, and they put a date on you anyway." "I know," she said. "It's all right, Reuben. I'm here." Dana Holloway rose the rest of the way out of the morning. She had been still all day, still under the mockery, still under the grip, still under the shove, and she was still now. But it was a different stillness, the stillness of something that no longer had any reason to pretend to be smaller than it was. She straightened and squared, and for the first time, the whole room saw her stand like exactly what she was, and not one of them would ever again be able to picture her as a clerk. Captain Hugh Lambert arrived at a near run because Whitaker had called him the moment the sedan's doors opened, and he came around the corner into a hallway full of soldiers at attention and 4 plainclothes operators and his own staff sergeant, standing gray and alone in the center of it. And he was a smart enough officer to read a room in one look. He had read worse. He took it in and his jaw set, and he turned to Brennan. "Staff Sergeant Brennan," Lambert said, and his voice carried down the whole corridor. "You're relieved. Effective now. You will report to my office, and you will wait for me there, and you will not say one more word to anyone in this hallway on your way out." He paused, and when he spoke again, it was lower and somehow heavier. "You spent your morning shoving a Distinguished Service Cross recipient around an orderly room for the entertainment of privates. We are going to have a very long conversation about who you choose to mock and how you ever came to believe that the quiet ones at the worst desks are the ones who don't matter." Brennan turned, gray and stammering, to the woman he had called a clerk. "Master Sergeant, I didn't. I had no idea, I swear. I had no idea." "I know," Dana Holloway said. "That's rather the point." She looked at him for a moment, and there was no triumph in it, and no cruelty, which was the thing that finally broke him more cleanly than any punishment could have. "Go easy on him," she said, and it took Lambert a second to realize she was talking to him, and not to Brennan at all. He's young. The loud ones are usually the ones still most afraid of being small. I have been shouted at by far better men than this one, and most of them are dead, and I find I don't have it in me to want one more young soldier's career on the pile. She turned back to Brennan. "But you will remember this. Not because I made you, because you'll never be able to forget it. That's enough." It was, somehow, the worst and the most merciful thing that could have been said to him, and Kyle Brennan walked out of that corridor a smaller and quieter, and possibly, eventually, a better man, carrying the one lesson that actually changes people, which is the memory of having been wrong in front of everyone and forgiven anyway. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. If this story reached you, subscribe to the Veteran Vault, and let it find the people who need to be reminded that the quiet ones at the worst desks are so often the ones who paid the most. The hallway came apart slowly, the way these things do. Soldiers drifting back to desks they would not really work at for the rest of the day, because they would be too busy turning the morning over in their hands. Whitaker came up to her last, after the others, and he did not say much, because he was not a man of many words, and she was not a woman who needed them. "I saw the mark this morning," he said. "I made some calls. I'm sorry it took the whole day." "You saw it," she said. "That's more than most. Thank you for trying, Sergeant Whitaker." And she meant it. And he knew she meant it. And that was the whole of the conversation. And it was enough. Outside, the June morning had burned off into a bright, flat noon, and the black sedan waited in the lot with its doors open. Dana Holloway walked to it with her team around her, not behind her, around her, the way men move around someone they are not going to lose again. And Major Castellano fell into step beside her and told her the truth plainly, because there had been enough years of things unsaid. "We never closed your file," he said. "Not the real one. There's a version with a stone on it, and there's the one the team kept, and the team's version never had a date on the end. We've been running your name through every quiet channel we have for 3 years. Tice found the thread 2 months ago. We've been pulling it ever since." He looked at her. "We voted, Master Sergeant. The whole team. Nobody signed off on a world without you in it. You're coming home." She stopped at the open door of the car and looked at the men she had walked into the dark to save, 8 years and a lifetime ago, standing here in a parking lot in the daylight because they had refused, all of them, to read the stone. "Took you long enough," she said. And Reuben Tice laughed, a wet, broken, enormous laugh, and the others laughed with him, and the sound of it carried across the parking lot, the particular sound of grief turning back into something else. It is a sound that does not get made very often, because the thing that makes it does not happen very often. The dead do not usually come back, and the searching does not usually end with anything but a stone and a folded flag. But it had ended otherwise here, and the men who had refused to stop looking stood around the woman they had found and laughed like that, because there was nothing else a human being could do with a feeling that size. Castellano put a hand on the roof of the car and looked at her over it. "There's going to be paperwork," he said. "A great deal of it. We have to unbury you officially, and the system does not like being told it was wrong. It'll take months." "I'm good at paperwork," she said. "You'd be surprised." She had let the world believe a stone. Her people had refused to read it. They put her in the car the way you carry something you had thought you'd lost and found again, past all hope of finding, careful and disbelieving and unwilling to set it down. And they closed the doors, and they drove their ghost back into the light. Behind them, in a low gray room that smelled of old coffee, the new clerk's desk sat empty, the stapler still squared to the edge, the in-processing backlog cleared to 0, and a battalion full of people who would spend the rest of their careers telling the story of the morning they learned what was sitting at the worst desk in the building. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.